Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our virtual tabling. And so, part of our series on Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, we are talking about tobacco abuse and traditional versus traditional use. So, tobacco is, of course, one of the four sacred medicines within, Native culture. And so, today we're going to highlight, traditional use versus commercial tobacco use, which, tobacco use can, impact our our ability to develop colorectal cancer. And so it's important that we make sure we stay smoke free. So without further interruption, let's get started. So tobacco use in the Native community, it's actually pretty high. So about 1 in 5 natives are actually smokers compared to about 1 in 10. So it's about twice the amount of smokers in the Native community as opposed to, the community of smokers as a whole. What's kind of scary too is that 40% of Native American high schoolers are also e-cig users, compared to around 27.5% overall. And additionally, about 55% of American smokers actually want to quit, which is a good thing, right? But it is kind of on the low side compared to around a third of smokers wanting to quit. As you if you look at the smoking community, the people who smoke as a whole. And so let's take a deeper look at commercial tobacco. So commercial tobacco is mass produced for recreational purchases, and oftentimes it does contain a lot more additives to help make it more attractive. So things like menthol cigarettes and more addictive. Um, and it also has a lot more toxins in it. You get like a lot of tar and things like that. Oftentimes we use cigarette smoking as a stress reliever, which again, because of that, it leads to it often being abused, and you know and this leads to all the health problems, so things like addiction, but even all of the health problems that we know from smoking, so things like lung cancer, mouth cancer, emphysema, COPD, all of those things. And the sad thing is that commonly a lot of tobacco companies use a lot of Native American motives in their marketing. So you think back to like the old cigarette stores, how they have like the cigar store Indians. And even if you look at this picture here, we have in the logo, they have, a Native American smoking a peace pipe, to kind of give off this impression that, oh, this is a cultural thing, this is like almost a sacred thing, and it really isn't. But on the other hand, traditional tobacco, it's it's solely used for ceremonial or medicinal purposes, or it's even used as an offering. So if someone gives me a little bit of information as as thanks for that information, or thanks for that advisory, I would give them tobacco as an offering. And traditional tobacco also isn't really associated with addiction or health problems. And this is mainly because when you do smoke it, it's the smoke isn't inhaled, so you're not getting all that nicotine. And it's not used habitually like commercial tobacco. You might burn tobacco every once in a while compared to, smoking a pack and a half, or maybe sometimes 2 packs, of commercial tobacco. And in addition, it is a lot more sacred. It does carry our thoughts and prayers to the spirit world. And this is something that, again, kind of with the marketing thing, that um, a lot of commercial tobacco corporations kind of play off, that especially, that this is like, oh, this is a cultural or sacred thing. Well, it really isn't, because it doesn't carry the same meaning like traditional tobacco does. And so let's talk a little bit more about just different quitting methods, and what you can do to kind of stay smoke free. So there's a few different quitting methods out there. The first one we'll kind of go over is counseling, and this is more on like the behavior side. So like um, why, finding out your triggers, why you'd smoke in the first place, and kind of breaking that habit that of going to grab a cigarette. And this can be done both individually, This can be done, as a group setting, and this can even be done virtually. So you could do it over the phone, or of course with the pandemic, we're so used to, going through Zoom and things like that. So, there's a lot of different options in terms of the counseling side of, of quitting smoking. And then on the other piece of that, you have nicotine replacement therapies and medication therapies, and this is to kind of help with the chemical side, or like the chemical side of smoking addiction. And so the nicotine replacement therapies, or NRTs, those are things like the gum, the nicotine patches, and that's just to give you a little bit of nicotine so that you're not feeling withdrawal as severe. And then the medication therapies, you have things like Chantix is a pretty popular one, but also Zyban. And this is to kind of make smoking not as rewarding. So when you smoke, it releases a chemical called dopamine. And what this chemical does is that's what's responsible for making smoking feeling so good. It's that like reward circuit in our brain. And so what Chantix does is it sort of prevents that reward circuit from functioning. So when you do smoke, you start to feel like, oh, well, why am I smoking? This isn't as pleasurable as it once was. And then you're more easily able to stop smoking because it blocks that reward circuit. And then another piece I do want to talk about is safe, quote unquote, forms of tobacco. And so the first one is smokeless tobacco, and that's things like chew or snuff, things like that. And people might think like, oh, well, this is completely safe because you're not smoking it. But smokeless tobacco still can cause mouth and throat cancer, and it still does contain nicotine, and it can still lead to addiction. So it's not necessarily safer than smoking cigarettes. Another kind of notorious kind of piece of, or new like tobacco product is, well, not tobacco, but vaporizers that use nicotine salts. And there's still a lot of research that has to be done around vaping and nicotine salt use. Um, the nicotine, or the vapor that you still get, can still contain harmful chemicals, and this is especially true if they're like bootlegged vape cartridges, because people aren't necessarily concerned with product control, and so you get a lot of different contaminants in them. The nicotine salts that are used to make like vape juice and things like that, the nicotine content is actually much higher than a cigarette. And so, it can still very much lead to nicotine addiction. And a common kind of thought is that, well, if you switch over to vaporizers to kind of help, wean yourself off of smoking, more research does still have to be done, but there is some evidence offering that, if you completely switch over to using vape products as opposed to using cigarette products, then you might see some health benefits. However, this isn't really, there still needs to be more research done. Um, so if you do try to, if you do want to quit smoking, I would kind of recommend, using like some form of behavioral counseling, whether that's meeting with a health coach or even talking with, the quit line, and then possibly even using that in conjunction with NRTs and medications. So how exactly would you stay free from tobacco use? So there's a couple of different pointers. One, of course, taking your medications and NRTs as directed. Another is to learn and cope with your triggers. So learn kind of what sets you to seek out a cigarette. And then, once you identify those, find new ways to cope with those triggers. So if you have a stressful day at work, instead of getting a cigarette, maybe you just go for a walk, or maybe you can find a different hobby that will, sort of alleviate that stress. And that ties into, of course, finding new forms of stress relief. And then also creating a support network. If you're surrounded by people who all smoke and they don't care, they're all fine with smoking, you know, not to say that you need to ice out, your friend group, but find people that will support you in wanting to quit smoking and that will be there for you. And so then there's different resources that we want to implement here at Glick. The first would be tobacco cessation specialists. So these would be individuals that would be able to provide this counseling and support. And so if you need help, identifying triggers or even just someone to talk to, like when you're having kind of a rough day and you just need to get a couple of things off your chest, they'll be there to listen to you and be able to provide that behavioral support to help you kind of break those, the behavior habits from smoking cigarettes. And then in addition, we're also aiming to provide NRTs directly through our pharmacy. And this would include both OTC and like over the counter stuff, so like the patches, the gum, as well as the prescriptions, so like Chantix and Zyban. So, if you meet with one of the tobacco cessation specialists and you would say, hey, I'm interested in trying Chantix, or I'm interested in the gum, what's all of that about? They would notify the pharmacy, the pharmacist would contact you, and then they would kind of go over, different medication histories with you, and then kind of figure out like what would be right for you in terms of dosages and in terms of, if that NRTs um, you know, would be appropriate for you. So keep an eye out on that because that is something we are planning on implementing relatively soon within the clinic. And that is all that I have for you today. So as always, let us know if you have any questions. You can always comment below, or you can email us at healthpromotion@glick.net. So thank you so much, and look out for our video on Thursday regarding traditional tobacco stories from our different employees here at the clinic. So look out for that, and I will see you again soon.